talking about needles, the different types of needles and the needle groups, what's available to you out there right now. We're also going to talk about tubes and tips, the different types you can get, and I'm going to give you some troubleshooting tips for tattooing with those, and I'm going to show you why it's important to buy an eye loupe and how it will help you out. So first things first, we're going to talk about our eye loupe, and this is really important piece of equipment for a tattoo artist. And what this does is it allows you to see the tips of the needles a lot clearer. It's like a magnifying glass. Now what this allows you to do is see the tips of your needles clearer, and what you want to do is make sure that you don't have a messed up needle before you start tattooing on somebody. Sometimes you can get a needle, and we'll do a mag for demonstration here, and you have some straight needles, and then you might have a needle that goes up, and then the corner of the needle has been bent sideways. So you get some straight needles, and then you get one that's been dinged and it goes off to the side like this. Now what happens is these needles will make nice little tiny holes like you want and push the ink in. Now this needle that's sideways will make a hole from here to here. So instead of getting one of these nice little small holes, what you'll get is a little slice or a little rip and a little tear, and you'll punch a hole into some skin this size instead of the tip of the needle. And then if that happens over and over and over again, you know, what you end up getting is just slicing a person and messing them up. Some other things that can happen are, in the needle making process, the needle doesn't get finished. It doesn't get completed all the way. And so you'll have some sharp needles, and then you'll have a needle with a little bulb at the end of it. A little fat tip on the end of it. And that's not going to be really sharp, that's going to be really dull, and that's going to cause a lot more trauma and a lot more pain going into somebody's skin. So you definitely don't want that, and you definitely don't want that. So there's all sorts of things that can happen to the needle before it even gets to you. So you want to check that out and make sure that your needles aren't damaged. Now, you might have a good needle, but what happens sometimes is when you try to force the needle into the tip and it doesn't fit quite correctly, or you're sitting here going back and forth jamming it into the tip, then that can also blunt the tip of your needle. So what you have to do is be very careful when you're putting your needle into your tube. Now, tubes made by different manufacturers aren't always going to be the same size. This one says it's an 11 flat tip. And this is a size 11 needle. Once you have your needle in your tip and you have everything hooked up to your machine, you want to check your needles again, because somewhere along the line you could have damaged the needle and it's ready to go once it's in your tattoo machine. So you're not going to be messing with it after that once you've tuned everything up and adjusted it. So you just want to push on your armature bar so your needles will come out, and then take your eye loop and check it again to make sure that your needles aren't messed up. Now, one of the problems is if you have a loose fitting tip, your needle group will move back and forth. Now, one of the problems is if you have a loose fitting tip, your needle group will move back and forth. You want your needle group to fit nice and snug inside of your tip without moving around. So this needle group is way too small for the tip of this tube. So what you can do if your needle group is too loose for a mag, you can take a razor blade, get a new one, now a new razor blade has some grease on it, some lubrication that the factory puts on there because razor blades like to rust really easy, so they put a little grease on there. To keep it from rusting. Now you don't want to take that grease and put it into your needle group. So we're going to take a little rubbing alcohol and spray it onto one of our paper towels, being very careful not to cut ourselves when we do this, and then put that rubbing alcohol on the razor blade and clean that off. You can kind of move away from the blade. You know, don't run this like this by your finger there. Just pinch the blade and kind of pull away from it. Kind of like if you're cleaning off the tip of your needle. And that way you're going to remove that nasty grease that's on there, and you're not going to put that in your needle and then put that into somebody's skin. So then we take our needle group and we're just going to fan this out a little bit, and that's just going to keep it nice and tight in our tip. But you don't want to do it a lot. You just want to stick it in the end set of needles, just run it down, and then go to your other side and run it down that end of the needles, and then go to your inner needles until you're going to work from the outside in, and you see that will fan out that mag, which will make it tighter in the tip. So you definitely don't want this side to side motion. Another thing you don't want is too much of an up and down motion. So what you can do is bend your needle bar slightly, but also bend your needle group slightly also, because you want this to be flat. You want this needle group to be flat in the end of your tube. Now that way it'll stay on the back of the tip, and it'll ride the back of that tip. Now what happens is you might have your tip and your needle set incorrectly, so instead of sitting flat like this, it's sitting up like this. So you don't want back and forth motion, but you also want to make sure it's sitting flat. So that's something you got to look for when you're setting up your mag needles. And you can get this kind of motion if you don't have enough tension, or you, instead of sitting flat, it's sitting up like this. If you're trying to tattoo and you notice that your line's not going in or your color's not going in where you want it to, it's kind of going a little off, it's probably because your needle's not sitting in the bottom of the tip. So you need to put a little rubber band tension on it so that it stays down here, and make sure that it's sitting snug in the tip so it doesn't move back and forth. So you just get straight up and down motion, and it sits in the bottom of your tip. If you don't do that, you're either going to be tattooing in the wrong spot, or you can get ink splatter coming out of your tip, or you could just not get a good result when you're trying to tattoo.